The carriage stops at Blackthorn Manor, and a quiet wedding yields a chilling vow: you will never share my bed. In halls gilded with portraits and whispers, a new Duchess stands alone, caught between duty and desire, dignity and humiliation. Every curtain hides a memory, every glance hints at a secret. A past refuses burial, and a single letter waits to breathe. Will pride guard a broken heart, or will one woman's courage unshutter the windows and light the fire he denies? The story begins where love is forbidden and truth is dangerous. Tell us where you're listening from, and what do you crave most in period romances? The slow burn, the scandal, or the redemption? Bath, England, April of 1851. The sky wept a slow grey drizzle as the carriage wheels rolled over wet cobblestones, echoing through the mist-veiled city like an omen. Inside the coach, Clarissa Elwood, now Duchess of Ravensmere, sat in silence. Her gloved hands rested motionless atop a folded handkerchief embroidered with her new initials, CG, as if the very fabric carried the weight of a life she had not chosen, but had agreed to wear like a corset, tight, suffocating and sewn by duty. She had married that morning in the small, austere chapel of St. James, without music, without laughter, and without the trembling warmth of love. The ceremony was brief, attended by two noble witnesses who spoke more to their watches than to the altar. Her new husband, Alaric Godwin, Duke of Ravensmere, had looked at her only once, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow cast by the brim of his top hat. There was no kiss to seal the union, only a signature, only silence. When the carriage finally creaked to a halt before Blackthorn Manor, Clarissa drew a steadying breath. The estate loomed like a relic carved from stone and sorrow, its high windows dark as unblinking eyes, its ivy-covered walls damp with the breath of the past. Two footmen stepped forward without a word, opening the door with mechanical precision. She descended alone. Rain kissed her bonnet, her shoulders, her pale grey travelling cloak. Behind her, Alaric stepped down, tall and severe in his black frock coat. He offered no arm, no glance. He simply walked ahead, his boots striking the wet stone like a funeral march. Inside, the manor greeted her not with warmth but with hush. Heavy velvet drapes suffocated the daylight. The scent of old wood, cold ash, and distant lavender lingered like memories too stubborn to fade. Servants bowed in silence, stiff, reverent, almost afraid. And Clarissa understood they did not bow to her. They bowed to the woman who had stood in her place before. They bowed to the ghost of Lady Honoria. As they moved through the entrance hall, Clarissa's eyes were drawn, irresistibly, to a grand portrait suspended above the main staircase. It was Honoria, immortalized in oil and gilt, wearing a silk gown the color of moonlight. Her gaze was elegant and aloof, her eyes a pale and unyielding blue. Even in stillness, she ruled the room. Clarissa felt the weight of that gaze settle on her shoulders like a frost. She looked away. Alaric stopped at the base of the stairs. His voice, when it came, was low and deliberate. "You will be shown to your rooms." He did not look at her. "If you require anything, speak to Mrs. Stratton. Dinner is at 7. I do not expect your company." Clarissa's heart thudded once, sharply, but she did not flinch. She lifted her chin just slightly and met his gaze. "Very well, Your Grace." His expression did not change, but there was something in his eyes. A flicker, perhaps, of guilt or regret, but it vanished as swiftly as it had come. Without another word, he turned and ascended the stairs, his silhouette vanishing into the shadows that clung to the upper floor. Clarissa remained in the hall, alone, but not alone. The hush of the manor felt almost sentient, as though it had taken note of her presence and was judging whether to accept her or devour her. Mrs. Stratton, a kind-eyed woman in her late 40s, appeared from a side corridor and offered a soft curtsy. "If you please, Your Grace," she said, "I'll show you to the Duchess's apartments." Clarissa followed her through silent corridors lined with ancestral portraits and furniture that seemed more museum than home. When they entered the suite, She paused at the threshold. The room was impeccably arranged. Crimson drapes, a carved four-poster bed, a fireplace laid but unlit. But what struck her most was the vanity table. Upon it sat a crystal perfume bottle, half full, a silver-backed brush, and a single pale blue ribbon frayed at the edges. They had not removed Honoria's things. Clarissa stepped inside slowly, her breath catching in her throat. A life frozen in time. A woman still lingering in objects, in walls, in hearts. "I'll have these removed if you wish, Your Grace," Mrs. Stratton said gently. "They should have been taken away long ago." "No," Clarissa replied, her voice soft but firm. "Leave them, for now." That evening, she dined alone in her rooms, staring at the flickering candlelight while the rain continued to fall. Somewhere in the East Wing, Alaric Godwin, her husband in name only, sat in his study, untouched and untouching, mourning a woman who no longer breathed, yet filled every room more than Clarissa ever could. She touched the embroidered handkerchief in her lap again, her thumb brushing over the stitched initials. Not as a sign of pride, but as a quiet declaration to herself. She would not beg for affection. She would not ask for pity. She had entered this house with her head held high, and she would not let it break her. Not tonight. Not ever. She rose from the table, crossed to the window, and looked out into the dark gardens below. Rain danced in the moonlight, silver threads over stone. Somewhere within those walls, a man had buried his heart with a woman lost. And somewhere else, a new Duchess began to build her armor, not of iron, but of silence, poise, and fire. Tomorrow would come, and she would be ready. The morning sun filtered through thick velvet drapes, casting dim ribbons of gold across the cold floorboards of the Duchess's chamber. Clarissa sat at the edge of the canopy bed, still in her nightgown, the lace cuffs of her sleeves folded neatly over her wrists. A small tray had been delivered with tea and buttered toast, but the porcelain cup remained untouched. The silence was constant at Blackthorn Manor, an oppressive presence, like fog that seeps into the skin and lingers in the bones. Even the ticking of the mantel clock felt louder than a voice. Clarissa rose and walked slowly to the window, drawing the curtain aside. The gardens below were formal and flawless, neatly trimmed hedges, rows of boxwood, and beds of white roses not yet in bloom. Everything was symmetrical, controlled, as if chaos had been banished from the grounds entirely, but even beauty could be sterile. There came a soft knock at the door. Clarissa turned. "Enter." Mrs. Maud Stratton, her lady's maid, stepped in with a gentle bow. She carried a dark green day dress with narrow sleeves and pearl buttons. Her greying hair was pulled into a bun beneath her lace cap, and her face bore the expression of a woman who had seen many duchesses come and go, but who had decided to treat this one with quiet loyalty. "Would your grace prefer the sage or the lavender ribbon today?" Clarissa allowed herself a faint smile. "The sage, I think. Lavender feels too sentimental." Mrs. Stratton nodded approvingly and laid out the dress with care. "I took the liberty of pressing your gloves. There's little enough to do here before luncheon, but if you wish a walk, the east path is quiet and shielded from the wind." Clarissa dressed in silence. Her movements were practiced, precise, but inside, her thoughts roamed the dark halls of the house, weaving through shadows and closed doors. She had not seen the Duke since the brief cutting conversation on their wedding night. The servants spoke of him in hushed tones. He kept to his study or the stables, emerging only for meals and brief meetings with the estate steward. And even then, he moved like a man whose presence had become a burden to himself. Later that morning, Clarissa wandered through the manor alone. The echo of her footsteps followed her like a question unanswered. She passed drawing rooms that had not been opened in years, chairs draped in linen, fire grates cold with untouched ash. At the end of a long corridor on the west side of the house, she discovered a door, slightly ajar. Inside was a small sitting room, a former dressing chamber perhaps. The wallpaper was faded rose, the hearth long unlit, but the furnishings had been preserved with unusual care. A chaise lounge still bore the indent of a body, as if someone had just risen from it. On the writing desk near the window, a quill rested beside an inkwell. This had been Lady Honoria's room. Clarissa stepped inside as if crossing a threshold into someone else's memory. Dust lay thin over the polished surface of the vanity. A hairbrush with pale strands still caught in its bristles lay beside a silver hand mirror. Bottles of scent, some nearly empty, stood in a small mirrored tray. She should not have lingered, but something compelled her. Her fingers brushed the writing desk. It was of fine mahogany, the drawers ornate with brass knobs. All but one opened easily. The last was locked. She tested it once, then twice. No key in sight. She turned to leave, then paused. A glimmer beneath the lace runner. She slid it aside, and there, taped to the underside of the upper drawer, was a narrow brass key. She hesitated only a moment before unlocking the drawer. Inside, there was a stack of yellowed papers and a single envelope, cream-colored, sealed in wax. Its surface bore a careful hand. To the future Duchess, Clarissa's breath caught. She stared at the envelope, unmoving. The air in the room felt colder. She did not open it. Not yet. Instead, she placed the letter inside a book from the nearby shelf and quietly left the chamber. That evening, Clarissa descended to the formal dining room. The footman opened the tall oak doors with ceremony. The table was long and gleamed like a black mirror. Candles burned low in silver candelabras. Only 2 places were set. Alaric was already seated, dressed in a black waistcoat with silver embroidery, his cravat tied with rigid precision. His expression was unreadable as always, his steel blue eyes focused on the glass of wine before him. Clarissa inclined her head. "Good evening, Your Grace." He nodded once. "Your Grace." No warmth, no inquiry. She took her seat. The first course was brought in silence, clear consommé with herbs. Clarissa sipped slowly, her posture impeccable. The only sounds were the faint clinks of silver against porcelain. "I trust you found your accommodations in order," Alaric said at last. His tone was distant, as though the inquiry had been forced upon him. "I did," she replied, "though the rooms seem untouched since your former Duchess occupied them." A flicker of reaction crossed his face. Not pain exactly, more like the ghost of it. He said nothing. Clarissa set her spoon down gently. "I mean no offense. It's only that the house feels suspended, between lives, between loves." He met her gaze finally. "Blackthorn does not change easily, nor, I imagine, do its inhabitants." The footmen exchanged uneasy glances as they served the second course. Roast pheasant. Clarissa broke the silence again. "I was told the Wintermere Ball is approaching." Alaric's eyes narrowed slightly. "You needn't attend such things if you prefer not to. Bath society can be unkind, so I've heard." His mouth curved, just barely. It was not quite a smile. "Then you are already wiser than most." She held his gaze for a moment longer, then returned her attention to her plate. But inside, a current of tension coiled tighter. He had not forbidden her to attend. He had not forbidden her anything, and yet he had placed her in a house where every inch whispered the name Honoria, where every object bore a memory she could never compete with. Later that night, Clarissa returned to her chambers and lit a candle. She retrieved the letter from where she had hidden it inside the Book of Psalms on her shelf. She sat at her writing desk, hands folded over the sealed wax. She did not break the seal. Not yet. But she knew something now. Something she had only suspected before. This was not a home. This was a shrine. And the woman it worshipped might be long buried, but her shadow still danced behind every curtain, every silence, every glance that passed between a husband and a wife who did not know one another. Clarissa lifted the candle, walked to the mirror, and looked at herself. Not the girl who had married a stranger out of duty, but the woman who now stood in a house that refused to breathe. "I am not a ghost," she whispered, and yet she lived among them. Tomorrow, perhaps, she would open the letter. But tonight, she would not let it own her. She blew out the candle. Darkness returned to Blackthorn Manor, and with it, the House of Shadows settled deeper into its silence. The rain had passed, leaving behind a fragile veil of morning mist that clung to the windows like forgotten breath. Clarissa sat at the edge of the drawing room, her gloved hands resting upon a porcelain teacup she had no intention of drinking from. Around her, the ladies of Bath society fluttered like peacocks dressed in silk, velvet and artifice, each smile a mask, each word a blade wrapped in velvet. She had been invited, of course. Lady Augusta Wintermere had made certain of that. The invitation had arrived 3 days earlier, sealed with the Wintermere crest and a note penned in Augusta's sharp, slanted hand. The Duchess must not remain cloistered forever. Come, dear Clarissa, and let us introduce you to proper society. A proper society. Clarissa had understood from the beginning that the tea was not a courtesy. It was an inspection, a test, a lion's den lined with lace and sugared biscuits. And now, seated in a pale rose armchair beneath a chandelier of imported glass, she watched the glances pass between the women like silent fire. Lady Augusta reclined on the chaise across from her, resplendent in an emerald gown trimmed with black chantilly lace, her gloved fingers delicately stirring her tea. She wore her hair coiled like a crown, and around her neck glimmered a sapphire pendant nearly identical to one Clarissa had seen in Honoria's portrait. The room was filled with polite conversation, but as the tea cooled and the sweets dwindled, the true purpose of the gathering emerged. "I do hope the Duchess is enjoying her stay at Blackthorn," said Lady Penelope Farley, her voice syrupy. "It is such a magnificent estate. I cannot imagine how lonely it must feel, being so grand and so quiet." There were titters of laughter. Clarissa raised her cup with practiced elegance. "I find solitude often speaks more truthfully than company." Lady Augusta tilted her head. "But surely not all silence is golden, is it? Some silences," her green eyes gleamed, "can be rather deafening." The air turned brittle. Clarissa's spine remained straight, her expression serene. "I've always believed that silence only disturbs those with something to hide," she replied, her voice as smooth as the porcelain in her hand. Another ripple of laughter, nervous this time. But Augusta was not done. She leaned forward slightly, her voice lowered in mock confidentiality. "Forgive me, but rumor does travel faster than carriages in this town. One cannot help but notice that the Duke and Duchess have yet to host a celebration of their union." Clarissa did not blink. "Do you refer to a ball, Lady Augusta? Or something more intimate?" Gasps quickly muffled. The room crackled with hidden delight and horror. Augusta smiled tightly. "Oh, I meant no offense, of course. I simply admire your composure. Many women would feel anxious given your position. So many eyes on you, waiting for signs of an heir, especially when the title is so valuable." Clarissa rose. "Then allow them to keep watching. I've never feared being seen, only being mistaken." With that, she curtsied and departed the room, the hem of her dove-grey gown whispering over the marble floor as she went. Outside, the afternoon sun was soft and cold. Clarissa stepped into the waiting carriage, her breath shallow with fury, not from embarrassment, but from the realization that she had been invited not as a guest, but as spectacle. The Duchess who had no child, the wife untouched, the merchant's daughter dressed in borrowed jewels. When she arrived at Blackthorn, she found no comfort in the grand staircase, nor in the quiet of her rooms. The walls whispered louder now. Mrs. Stratton helped her change into a darker gown for dinner, but Clarissa sent word that she would take her meal in the Duchess's drawing room instead. She could not bear another evening seated across from Alaric's silence. She was still pacing when a sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. She turned as the door opened and froze. "Clarissa?" The voice, trembling and familiar, belonged to Edwin Elwood, her younger brother. He stood in the doorway, soaked from the rain that had begun again without warning, his eyes wild and sunken, his coat several seasons out of fashion. "Edwin!" She rushed to him, taking his face in her hands. "What are you doing here? What's happened?" I'm sorry I shouldn't have come," he said, voice cracking. "But I had no one else. They threatened to have me arrested. Clarissa, I didn't know what to do." She led him to the fire, stripping off his wet coat with firm hands, and called for hot tea and towels. Only once he had warmed and settled did he speak again. It was a card game, just one. But Lord Densbury, he saw me there. He offered to cover my debt if I signed a note. I didn't understand how much it would grow. Clarissa stiffened. Densbury. He's an enemy of the Duke. I know. That's why he lent it. Not to help me, but to humiliate you. And Alaric. Clarissa's hands curled into fists. How much? £80. Her heart sank. Not an impossible sum, but one that would draw questions she could not afford. That night she found Alaric in his study. He stood by the fireplace, swirling brandy in a cut crystal glass, his face half illuminated by firelight. He did not look at her. "My brother is in trouble," she said without preamble. "He owes a debt to Lord Densbury." "I see," Alaric replied. His voice was clipped. "He was lured into it. It's not just about the money. It's meant to shame you, to shame us both." "Then let him suffer the shame." Clarissa stared at him. "You would abandon a boy to ruin for the sake of pride?" Alaric turned toward her slowly, his eyes hard. "For the sake of reality. This house is not your charity, Duchess, nor am I your purse." Her breath caught, not in weakness, but in disbelief. "I see," she said quietly. "Then you are right. You are not my purse, nor, it seems, my husband." She left the room without waiting for an answer. Later, when the manor had grown still and even the wind had ceased to knock at the windows, Clarissa sat before her writing desk and reached once more for the letter she had left unopened too long. To the future Duchess, her fingers broke the wax. The parchment crackled as she unfolded it. Honoria's handwriting was precise, elegant, slanted slightly to the right. "If you are reading this, then I am gone. I do not know your name, I do not know your face, but I know you exist and I know the walls you now walk. They are beautiful and they are dangerous." Clarissa leaned closer, her breath shallow. "I began to feel unwell after the harvest ball. Fevers, a weakness in my limbs, nightmares that bled into day. I spoke of it once to the doctor. He gave me laudanum, but the dreams only worsened. I no longer trust the tea. I no longer trust the food. I no longer trust the people around me. There is someone here, someone I once thought loyal, who watches me too closely. I do not know what they want, but I feel it, creeping like ivy through the cracks. Be careful. Look where I did not. The danger is not in the storm outside, it is here, hidden in plain sight." Clarissa let the letter fall to her lap. The fire beside her crackled louder, as if it too had read the words and recoiled. A cold shiver traced her spine. And for the first time, she did not wonder if the past was haunting this house. She feared it had never left. The days that followed were grey in more ways than the weather. Mist clung to the gardens like a mourner's veil, and the air within Blackthorn Manor grew heavier, as though it too bore the weight of unspoken truths. Every corridor, every footstep, every glance carried an echo, soft but unmistakable. Clarissa moved through the house like a woman both seen and unseen. She spoke little, but she listened, she watched, she remembered. The letter from Honoria had not left her nightstand. Its words had sunk deep into her thoughts, poisoning them with quiet questions. Who had Honoria feared? Why had her health declined so suddenly? And why had no one in this house, not even Alaric, spoken of it? At first, she dismissed the idea of speaking with the staff. They, like the furniture, had long been fixtures of Blackthorn, loyal, discreet, and closed as tombs. But a glance, a murmur, the way a footman hesitated before placing the tea tray, all of it suggested something more, something buried. It was Mrs. Stratton who gave her the first hint. They were in the Duchess's dressing room, Clarissa seated by the vanity while the older woman brushed out her chestnut hair, the long strokes rhythmic and calming. But when Clarissa casually mentioned Lady Honoria's final weeks, the brush slowed. "She seemed unwell," Clarissa asked gently, watching the mirror. Mrs. Stratton hesitated. "She changed." Clarissa turned her head slightly. "How so?" There was a fear in her, a quiet one. Not the sort you name aloud, but the sort you wear even when you're smiling. She would forget things, stumble when she never had before. Her hands trembled, but more than anything, she paused. She stopped trusting people. She locked her drawers, dismissed her maid of 10 years without reason, and spoke to no one, except the doctor and the Duke. And did His Grace see it? Mrs. Stratton's gaze lifted to meet Clarissa's in the mirror. "He saw, but I cannot say what he believed." The conversation left Clarissa colder than the autumn wind that had begun to creep through the Manor's cracked windows. She knew that fear. It was the same kind that lived in Honoria's letter, the same that now lingered in her own chest like a secret, waiting to bloom into dread. That evening, Clarissa walked the halls alone. The clock had just struck 10 when she climbed the curved staircase toward the west wing, guided only by the flicker of a single candle. The servants had long since retired, and the Manor was hushed in that peculiar way it always was at night, less asleep than holding its breath. She passed closed doors, some never opened in years, until she reached the portrait gallery. It was a long, solemn corridor, paneled in walnut and lined with ancestors. Dukes and duchesses, long dead, stared down from their gilded frames with judgmental pride. And at the very end, centered beneath a narrow arched window, hung the largest of them all, Lady Honoria Godwin, her likeness captured in youthful splendor. Clarissa stepped inside, heart steady, eyes sharp. But she was not alone. Alaric stood at the far end, his back to her, silhouetted against the moonlight spilling through the arched glass. His posture was rigid, his arms crossed behind him. He did not turn when she entered. "She was beautiful," Clarissa said, her voice low. He did not respond. Clarissa approached slowly, the candle in her hand casting soft golden light upon the faces in the frames as she passed them. "She wrote a letter," she continued, "to me, or rather to whoever would come after her. She feared someone close to her, someone in this house." Alaric turned at last. His face was cast half in shadow, but his eyes were clear and tired. "You read it?" "I did." A silence fell between them. The air felt charged, like a storm withheld by sheer force of will. "She was not wrong to be afraid," he said at last. Clarissa's breath caught. "Then you knew?" He looked away toward the window again. "I knew that she had changed. I told myself it was grief or anxiety, that she was fragile, not frightened. I was a fool." Clarissa stepped closer. The flame of her candle flickered, casting ghostly movement across Honoria's painted face. "Did you love her?" Alaric's gaze shifted back to her, and for a moment she saw something raw in him, unmasked and almost tender. "I did, but I failed her. I failed her because I did not see what she needed. Or perhaps I chose not to see it." He took a step closer, his voice lowering. "She came to me once, days before her fall. She said she thought someone was poisoning her, that her body no longer felt like her own. I dismissed it. I thought she was unraveling. I told her to rest. I sent for the physician, but I did not believe her." Clarissa's throat tightened. "And then she fell, or she was pushed, or she lost her footing in a daze. I'll never know." A gust of wind howled outside, rattling the stained glass with a moan that seemed almost human. Clarissa took another step. She could feel the heat of him now, though he did not touch her. "Why have you kept it silent?" she asked. "Why bury her twice, once in the ground and once in silence?" Alaric's eyes searched hers. "Because I am not certain if I lost her or killed her." The words landed with the weight of stone. Clarissa's eyes burned, not from tears, but from the ache of understanding something too vast to soothe. He had been carrying this, not grief, guilt. He turned away, his hands gripping the windowsill. "I'm not a good man, Clarissa." She stepped beside him, her voice a whisper. "Then prove me wrong." His head bowed, just slightly. She felt the air shift between them, not in passion, but in truth. And truth was more intimate than touch. Neither of them moved for several heartbeats. Outside, the wind continued to weep against the walls. And within, two souls stood together. Not yet lovers, not yet partners, but no longer strangers either. Clarissa turned and began to walk back down the gallery, her candle once more lighting the way. She did not need to ask if he had ever mourned Honoria. She could see it now. He had never stopped. But perhaps, just perhaps, he was beginning to grieve her differently. And Clarissa, she was beginning to see the shape of the ghost that haunted this house. Not a woman, but a silence that had gone on too long. The invitations had arrived weeks in advance, engraved with gold ink and sealed with the Wintermere crest. No one declined the Wintermere ball. To do so was to exile oneself from the corridors of influence and whispered power that flowed through Bath's social season like perfume through lace. Clarissa had received hers late, as if by oversight or disdain. The envelope had been delivered by a nervous footman, and when she opened it, the message was clear. The presence of Her Grace, the Duchess of Ravensmere, is expected at the annual Wintermere Ball. Formal attire, 11 o'clock sharp. No request. No warmth, only expectation. At first, she had considered refusing, but as she stood before her mirror days later, draped in a gown of midnight blue silk, the fabric trimmed in jet and edged in fragile black lace, she knew she would go. Not for society, not for Augusta, not even for Alaric. She would go because ghosts only lose their power when faced. Mrs. Stratton adjusted the final pin in her hair, securing a black garnet comb above the coiled braids at the nape of her neck. The candlelight cast shadows across Clarissa's face, but her gaze held no fear, only a stillness born of resolve. "You look," Mrs. Stratton paused, "stronger than they expect." Clarissa gave a faint smile. "Then let them be surprised." The ball was held at the Wintermere estate, a sprawling Georgian manor just beyond the city limits, lit from every window like a ship at sea. Carriages arrived in streams, their occupants cloaked in furs and silk, descending onto a carpet of crushed stone that glinted under lanterns. Clarissa stepped from the Godwin carriage alone. Alaric had made no move to accompany her, though the family crest on the door made clear who she represented. Her entrance was watched by many and acknowledged by few. A duchess in name, but not in lineage. The whisper followed her. The untouched bride, the childless mistress of a mourning house. Inside, the ballroom was a cathedral of decadence. Gold filigree framed the vaulted ceilings, and chandeliers rained light like falling stars. The scent of gardenias, beeswax, and expectation hung in the air. Clarissa took her place at the edge of the marble floor, nodding politely to those who approached, declining dances with a gentle smile. She felt eyes upon her, some curious, some cruel. And then she saw her. Lady Augusta Wintermere, descending the staircase with the practiced grace of a stage actress, entering her final act. Her gown was sapphire silk, embroidered with silver thread, the exact shade and cut of the one Honoria had worn in the portrait that still hung above the gallery at Blackthorn. The message was unmistakable. A hush passed through the crowd, followed by murmurs. Some turned toward Clarissa to gauge her reaction, but she remained still, her expression unreadable. She would not give Augusta the satisfaction. Augusta approached with a smile too sweet to be sincere. "My dear Clarissa," she cooed, her green eyes glittering. "I see you've chosen blue as well. How lovely. Though I must confess, I've always thought sapphire suited stronger women." Clarissa met her gaze with a calm that chilled. Then I'm certain it will suit me just fine." The sting was not loud, but it was heard. Augusta's smile faltered for a breath before she floated away like smoke. Moments later, the orchestra struck its first note. The dance began, a swirl of color and ritual. Clarissa watched the movement from her corner of the room until a man bowed before her. "Your Grace," he said, his tone silky. "Would you honor me with the next waltz?" He was tall, handsome in a way that knew itself and unfamiliar. A marquess, perhaps, or a cousin of one. Clarissa hesitated, then took his hand. She would not hide. Their steps were well matched, his conversation light. But with each turn, his hand slid lower on her back. His smile grew too bold. "I must say," he murmured, "your beauty is only exceeded by your mystery. One wonders how the Duke can bear to keep you all to himself." Before Clarissa could answer, a voice, low, commanding, and unmistakable, cut through the music. "She is not yours to wonder about." The crowd parted as Alaric Godwin stepped onto the floor, dressed in a black tailcoat and silver-threaded waistcoat. His expression unreadable, but his presence volcanic. Clarissa's partner stepped back with a bow. "Your Grace." Alaric extended his hand to her. "Dance with me." It was not a question. She placed her gloved hand in his, and the orchestra, as if sensing the tension, began a new waltz. Slower, darker. Their bodies moved in perfect time, but the space between them was a battlefield. His hand at her waist was firm, possessive. "You came," she said quietly. "You expected I would not. I stopped expecting anything from you." His jaw tightened. "And yet you wear that dress, as if you knew I would see you in it." She met his gaze, unblinking. "I wore it for myself." The crowd watched as the Duke and Duchess of Ravensmere circled the floor in silence, a storm cloaked in silk and civility. Clarissa felt the tension in his hand, the barely there tremble of his fingertips where they brushed her spine. His eyes never left hers. "I should not have let you come alone," he murmured. "You did." Their turn ended. Applause followed, but it sounded far away. Alaric bowed, released her hand and turned sharply. Without another word, he vanished into the crowd. Clarissa stood alone at the center of the room. Her breath caught somewhere between a gasp and a plea she would never voice. The music resumed, the lights shimmered, but for her, the room had gone cold. She did not know what hurt more, his absence or the hope his presence had ignited. Later, as the ball wore on and the night deepened, she stood by the balcony, staring at the garden below. Somewhere behind her, voices laughed, glasses clinked, skirts rustled, but all she could feel was the ghost of his hand still lingering at her waist, and the truth she could not ignore. There was something in his touch that denied everything he had said, something in his silence that screamed everything he would not admit. The day broke with the scent of frost and desperation. The windows of Blackthorn were glazed with pale mist, and the sky hung low, the color of pewter and unspoken fears. Clarissa stood at the hearth in her sitting room, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The fire crackled, but it brought her no warmth. Downstairs, her brother Edwin sat pale and trembling in the morning room, his shoulders hunched and coat damp with cold. The butler had reluctantly allowed him in after Clarissa insisted, though it was clear the presence of a trembling young man in threadbare boots did not suit the house's notion of propriety. Edwin had spoken little since his arrival at dawn, save for a whisper that chilled her to the bone. "They said, if I don't pay by week's end, I'll be taken in, publicly. In front of the club, I'll be ruined, Clarissa." The debt had grown. What had begun as a foolish wager, £50, had doubled with interest, fines, and the cruel games of Lord Densbury, who seemed to take a special pleasure in tightening the noose. The sum now stood at nearly £100, an amount Edwin could never repay. And Clarissa, she had no access to the Godwin accounts, no dowry untouched by the Duke's signature. She had no choice. That afternoon, Clarissa had her carriage prepared and gave the driver a name that tasted like ash in her mouth. Lady Augusta Wintermere. The Wintermere estate was already awake with preparations for the next gathering. though its mistress received Clarissa with practiced surprise. Augusta stood in her morning parlour, draped in a gown of burgundy velvet, her dark hair perfectly pinned despite the hour. She looked at Clarissa as one does a bird who has flown into the wrong room, amused, curious, ready to see it struggle. "To what do I owe the pleasure, Your Grace?" Augusta purred, gesturing toward a chaise. "You look positively chilled." "I won't waste your time," Clarissa said, remaining standing. "My brother owes a debt to Lord Densbury, a debt that will destroy him." Augusta raised a perfectly arched brow. "How unfortunate. Densbury can be ruthless, though he does so adore a spectacle." But Clarissa's voice did not tremble. "He does this not for the sum, but for the shame it brings the Godwin name." "Indeed." Augusta sipped her tea, then set the cup down with a gentle clink. "Then it is a family matter. Surely your husband—" "He refuses." The admission burned, but she did not look away. "Which is why I have come to you." A pause, then a slow, cat-like smile. "My dear Clarissa, you surprise me. Can you settle the debt?" "Of course. I could have it resolved by nightfall." Relief bloomed in Clarissa's chest, but it was short-lived. "And in exchange?" Augusta rose. She walked slowly toward Clarissa, her voice soft as silk and sharp as the brooch pinned at her breast. "In exchange you leave Bath, the manor, the name, quietly, without scandal. You return to wherever you came from, some merchant's shadow, wasn't it? And I restore to Blackthorn what it has lost." Clarissa's breath caught. "What it has lost?" "A real Duchess," Augusta said, her smile widening. "One with blood, not ink in her veins. One who knows how to console a man who has suffered." The silence that followed was not weakness. It was fury sheathed in grace. Clarissa met her rival's gaze without blinking. "Then I pity you, Lady Augusta, that after all your schemes, all your silks and sharpened words, you still believe you are second to a woman whose heart you could never match." Augusta's expression flickered just for a moment. "I'll pay it myself," Clarissa said, turning. "Even if it costs me everything," and it nearly did. That evening, in the privacy of her dressing room, Clarissa removed a jeweled hairpin from its velvet case. It was a piece gifted to her as part of her dowry, a cluster of sapphires surrounded by black diamonds, once owned by Alaric's grandmother. She had worn it only once, on her wedding day. She wrapped it in silk and placed it inside a small box. By morning, the debt was paid. Edwin would remain free. But freedom, she knew now, came at the price of silence. 2 nights later, as rain wept against the windows and wind moaned through the cracks, Alaric entered the drawing room unannounced. Clarissa stood by the fireplace, her eyes fixed on the flicker of flame. He held something in his hand, a folded note, the receipt of the payment. "You pawned a Godwin heirloom." She turned slowly. "I did." "For him?" "Yes." He stepped closer, the paper crumpling in his fist. "Why not come to me?" Her eyes did not waver. "Because I am not your wife, I am your burden." The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and bitter. Alaric said nothing. He stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable, and then he turned and walked away. That night the manor did not sleep. Mrs. Stratton, making her way past the study near midnight, saw the flicker of flames behind the glass. She paused, heart catching in her throat. Inside, Alaric stood before the hearth, a box of letters at his feet. One by one he fed them to the fire. Some were bound in faded ribbon, others bore Honoria's delicate hand, each curled into ash with reluctant grace. He did not cry, but his face was that of a man exorcising not memory, but guilt. Outside, the wind howled, tugging at the windows as if begging to be let in. But no one answered. And somewhere upstairs, Clarissa stood in her darkened chambers, the empty velvet box in her hand, the fire in her heart flickering but unquenched. She had chosen pride over pity, truth over submission. She had lost a jewel, but kept her soul. It began with the scent of burning linen, not smoke, not firewood, but fabric, familiar and wrong. Clarissa stirred from her chair near the hearth in her sitting room, where she'd fallen asleep with Honoria's diary cradled in her lap. The pages were worn with age, each entry written in a precise, elegant hand that betrayed the tremor of a woman who had grown afraid to speak aloud. The hour was late. Rain had tapped on the windows all evening, but now the sound was gone, replaced by a silence so total it throbbed in her ears. Then came the scent again, stronger now, bitter, charcoal and lavender. She rose and opened her door. The corridor was quiet, the sconces flickering uneasily. Somewhere in the east wing, a low popping sound echoed through the hall, then another, like knuckles cracking in the bones of the manor. Clarissa began walking. Her slippers made no sound against the carpet. The air grew warmer with each step. She reached the gallery, where Honoria's portrait stood cloaked in shadow. Beyond it, the hallway curved toward the rooms that had belonged to the late Duchess. Rooms no one used. Rooms that should have remained untouched. And then, suddenly, came the unmistakable crack of flames. Clarissa gasped as she turned the final corner. The door to Honoria's dressing room glowed at the seams. Smoke snaked beneath it in thin, dark fingers. A curtain inside must have caught. The scent of lavender sachets burning was now unmistakable. She rushed forward, flinging the door open. Heat surged toward her, a wave of breathless air and orange light. The fire hadn't consumed the room yet, but it was spreading fast. A chair near the hearth was engulfed. Flames licked the edges of the vanity. The mirror had cracked from the heat, distorting her reflection into a spectre. And there, on the floor, lay a scattering of papers. A drawer had fallen. Pages curled at the edges, glowing with heat. Clarissa hesitated, just for a moment. Then she darted forward, pulling her cloak up to shield her face. She knelt beside the vanity, grabbing what she could, burning her fingers on the metal handle of a box, flinging it open, hoping. A crack above her. Wood groaned. Then a beam came crashing down, splintering the vanity in two. Smoke swallowed the room. Clarissa tried to scream but choked. Her lungs seized. She stumbled backward, coughing violently, the heat closing in. The room was disappearing in colorless flame, the door lost behind waves of smoke. Her knees gave out, her vision darkening. And then arms, strong, solid arms, scooping her up. Alaric. He said nothing. There was no time. He threw his coat over her and carried her out of the inferno, his breath ragged, the smoke clawing at them both as they staggered through the hallway. His pace was fast but unsteady, his boots slipping against the damp stone. The servants were yelling now. Bells were ringing. A maid screamed. Footmen ran past with buckets. In the main hall, Alaric collapsed to his knees, still holding Clarissa in his arms. Her body trembled violently, soaked in sweat, her lips cracked from heat and panic. He laid her on the chaise before the parlour hearth and shouted for water. Clarissa coughed, her hands trembling as they grasped his coat. "The papers!" she rasped. "I tried." "You fool!" he snapped, eyes wild. "You would risk your life for ghosts." The fire burned for hours, but the east wing was saved. Just. The dressing room, however, was ruined. The cause remained unknown. A candle, perhaps, a forgotten ember. But Clarissa knew better. She had not lit a flame. Later that night, when her strength returned and the doctor had gone, Clarissa found herself once more in the drawing room, this time dry, clean, and alive. Alaric stood by the fireplace, his coat discarded, his sleeves rolled. His shirt was stained with soot, his face unreadable. "I should never have let those rooms remain as they were," he said, his voice low. "I should have locked them, sealed them, destroyed them." "You preserved them," Clarissa replied hoarsely, "as if by doing so you could keep her alive." Alaric turned on her, his eyes ablaze. "And you walk through her memories as if they were your own. You wear her silence. You read her words. You search through her drawers like a thief." Her breath hitched, but she did not look away. "I search for truth, because no one else dares to." He stepped forward, shadows dancing across his jawline, his posture stiff with fury. "You don't know what you're doing. You don't understand what she meant to me." "No," Clarissa said softly, "because you won't let me. You won't let anyone." Their eyes locked. The fire cast long streaks of amber across the floor. "You think your grief is sacred," she whispered, "but it's not. It's your prison, and you keep building it higher every day." Silence fell. Not the comfortable kind, but the kind that divided people like a blade. Alaric's expression did not change, but something in his shoulders shifted. His breath grew shallow. He turned away, walking slowly to the window, and pressed a hand to the cold glass. Clarissa left him there, taking only one thing with her, the box she had grabbed from the flames. Back in her chambers, she opened it with hands that still trembled. Inside, nestled between scorched silk and brittle ribbon, was a single sheet of paper, sealed and folded, its edges singed. She unfolded it slowly. It was a letter, written in the same neat hand that filled the diary. A final page, torn, almost hidden. The ink was faded but legible. "I heard them last night, behind the library doors. I should not have been there, but I had dropped my bracelet and returned to retrieve it. The voices were sharp, one male, one female. Hers, I knew, Augusta. She spoke of legacy, of power, of bloodlines. She said I was too delicate, that my place was fragile, that I should prepare to yield. I think she knows, I think she suspects, that I'm with child." Clarissa froze. She read the line again. With child. The room spun. The fire flickered violently as if reacting. She looked at the paper, her pulse drumming in her ears. The ink was blotched at the end, the sentence unfinished. But the implication was unmistakable. Honoria had been pregnant. And Augusta had known. Clarissa's grip tightened. There were too many coincidences, too many accidents, too many unasked questions buried under the guise of mourning. And now, one thing was clear. The fire was not chance. She folded the letter with care, placed it back in the box, and locked it away. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more danger. But tonight, she would sleep knowing this. She had survived the fire, and the ghosts of Blackthorn were beginning to speak. The fire had left a scar on Blackthorn Manor, charred wood, blackened stone. The east wing smelled of damp ash and memory, and servants passed through it with lowered voices and quick steps. Alaric had ordered the dressing room sealed off entirely. Boards were nailed over the broken windows, and furniture was removed in silence piece by piece, as if removing bones from a grave. But what haunted Clarissa more than the smoke was the letter she had recovered from the flames, the one that bore Lady Honoria's final fears. A page ripped from her diary, half burned, half saved, but complete enough to whisper a truth no one had dared to speak. Honoria had been with child, and she had been afraid, not of accident or illness, but of a woman, Lady Augusta Wintermere. The implication clung to Clarissa like the scent of soot. She could not dismiss it. She could not forget it. And she could no longer pretend that the past was buried. It was still breathing, hidden in the walls. On the morning after the fire, Clarissa rose before dawn. She dressed without assistance, pulling on a modest navy wool gown and pinning her hair with quiet purpose. She told no one where she was going, not even Mrs. Stratton. The carriage she hired was plain, with no crest. She had memorized the address from the house ledger months ago. A small cottage near Holloway, marked in fading ink. Mrs. Judith Caxton, former lady's attendant to her grace. Honoria Godwin. The journey took over an hour through winding roads, past skeletal trees and frost-covered fields. Winter had arrived early, as if summoned by grief. When the cottage came into view, a squat structure with peeling paint and a sagging roof, Clarissa felt her heartbeat quicken. She stepped out and approached the door slowly. Her knock echoed in the cold air. It opened with a creak. The woman who answered was thin, wrapped in a shawl that had seen better years. Her hair, once chestnut, had faded to grey, and her hands trembled as she held them close to her chest. But her eyes, those eyes, were sharp, watchful. Clarissa curtsied. "Mrs. Caxton?" The woman studied her carefully. "You're the new one. I am Clarissa Elwood, Duchess of Ravensmere. I know who you are." Clarissa hesitated. "I need to speak with you about Lady Honoria. Please." Mrs. Caxton hesitated only a moment, then stepped aside. "Then you'd best come in." The cottage smelled of herbs and old linen. A kettle steamed softly on the stove. The woman gestured toward a wooden chair. Clarissa sat, her gloves still on her lap. "I won't waste your time," Clarissa began. "I know Honoria was pregnant. I know she was afraid. I believe she left behind a letter that mentions you were the last to see her well." The old woman's face hardened. "That letter survived." "Barely." Mrs. Caxton sank into the seat across from her and was quiet for several breaths. "She was radiant," she said finally. "Not just with beauty. She glowed with joy when she found out. She was going to tell His Grace after the Wintermere Ball." Her voice faltered. "But she never made it there." Clarissa's hands tightened. She suspected someone wanted to stop her. "She told me as much," the woman whispered. "She said Lady Augusta was pressuring her, that she would stop at nothing to protect her claim to the family line." "She had no claim." "She believed she did," Mrs. Caxton said darkly. "And she had allies in the house. None more dangerous than Mr. Dandridge." "The steward," Mrs. Caxton nodded. "He was Augusta's cousin. Quiet, loyal, always watching. I told Honoria to be careful, but she wouldn't listen. Said she had to confront him, that she couldn't live in fear." Clarissa felt her chest tighten. And then she started getting sick. Slowly, first it was headaches, then nausea. She stopped sleeping. Her skin turned pale, almost blue. She was a ghost before she died. Was there ever proof? No. The woman's voice trembled. "But I know poison when I see it, and I know fear." She had both. Clarissa stood. Her breath felt sharp in her lungs. "Thank you. You've given me more than I hoped." Mrs. Caxton reached out and touched her hand. "Find justice for her, if you truly care. Don't let the manor eat you the way it ate her." Clarissa nodded once. Then she turned and left. The air outside felt colder than before. By the time she returned to Blackthorn, she knew what had to be done. That evening, she found Alaric in the library, seated in a high-backed chair, a decanter of brandy half empty beside him. The fire crackled low, casting shadows against the walls of books. "I need to speak with you," she said quietly. He looked up, surprised. He hadn't expected her to come to him. "I visited a woman today," she said. "Mrs. Caxton," his brow furrowed. "Judith, she served Honoria." "She did. She told me everything." Alaric rose slowly. "Clarissa, she was pregnant. She planned to tell you, and Augusta knew." He stiffened. "That's not—" "She used Dandridge, her cousin. The poison was slow, just enough to weaken her. And when she planned to confront them, she fell, or was pushed. Or perhaps she didn't fall at all. Perhaps her body simply failed her." Alaric looked stricken. "You're accusing—" "I'm not accusing," Clarissa said firmly. "I'm asking you to open your eyes, to stop hiding behind grief, and finally see the truth that's been rotting these walls." He paced. "You're speaking of murder. I'm speaking of love betrayed, of legacy threatened, of a woman silenced because she carried hope." The room seemed to shrink. The fire snapped. Alaric turned to her, eyes wild. "Then what do you propose?" "Speak to Dandridge," she said. "Ask him. If he flees, you'll know. If he denies it, you'll know. But look him in the eye and ask." The following morning, Alaric summoned Dandridge to his study. The steward arrived at noon, silent and severe, as always. But when Alaric mentioned the name Augusta, when he asked what had happened in the East Wing years ago, Dandridge's hands began to shake. He denied nothing. He simply turned, fled the study, and vanished before the hour was out. By dusk, he was found. His body floated near the banks of the Avon River, eyes open, lips parted, a stillness upon him that confirmed what Clarissa had already known. The truth had come to the surface and drowned. That night, the manor was quiet. Clarissa stood in the drawing room, gazing into the fire. The flames moved gently, not like the ones that had tried to consume her, but like the ones that warmed a home. Alaric entered without announcement. He crossed the room slowly. "It was true," he said. "All of it." She turned to face him. "I have lived in blindness," he confessed, voice cracking. "I clung to her memory so tightly I never saw that it had become a lie." Clarissa's eyes filled with tears, not from sorrow, but from the relief of hearing truth. "Then open them," she whispered. "I am here." For a long moment he simply looked at her, and in his silence there was no longer mourning. There was only awakening. Blackthorn Manor had never known such silence. Not the cold silence of grief, nor the weighty hush of secrets locked behind portraits and shuttered windows, but the trembling quiet before a storm of reckoning. The air was charged with something unspoken, and Clarissa felt it in her very breath as she paced the library, the sealed letter in her hands still warm from her grip. Alaric entered without knocking. He had not shaved, and the weariness in his eyes made him look years older. But there was something else now, an alertness beneath the fatigue, as if the fog that had once clouded his judgment had finally begun to lift. "I asked Mrs. Stratton where you were," he said softly. "She said you hadn't taken breakfast." Clarissa looked up, her fingers tightening on the envelope. "There's something you must know, something I should have told you sooner." She crossed the room, offering him the letter. It bore no wax seal, only the clean, pointed hand of Lady Augusta Windermere. Alaric unfolded it slowly. His gaze moved over the words in silence. Clarissa watched his expression change, first confusion, then cold fury. "When did she give you this?" he asked. "The day after the fire," she replied. "She said if I disappeared quietly, Edwin's debt would vanish, that I could return to London, free of scandal, with my family intact." He turned from her. "And you said nothing?" "I was going to," Clarissa answered, voice low. "But you were still mourning a ghost, and I was still unsure if I was even your wife or simply the woman who now walked your halls." He exhaled harshly, staring at the letter as if it burned. "She tried to destroy everything," he said. "Honoria, you, even me." Clarissa stepped forward. "Then let her be seen. Let the truth be spoken, not in the shadows of this house, but in the light." That evening, invitations were sent. A supper to honor peace restored at Blackthorn. The excuse was thin, but the whispers in Bath were already growing restless for answers. It was the perfect setting. Alaric ensured Augusta would not refuse. By twilight, the drawing room was filled with flickering chandeliers and murmurs of silk and speculation. Nobles and socialites paraded in their finest, eyes darting toward Clarissa in her garnet gown, toward Alaric who stood beside her, silent as carved stone. They knew something was coming. Augusta arrived late. She wore peacock silk and a mask of serenity. Her smile faltered only briefly when she spotted Clarissa at Alaric's side, and then again when no one bowed. The meal began in brittle politeness, but when the final course was cleared, Alaric rose. The room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice steady, "I am grateful for your presence tonight. Many of you know that my household has endured whispers, shadows, and tragedy. Heads turned, fans stilled mid-flutter. But truth has a way of surviving fire. Even secrets, when buried long enough, find their way to the surface." He reached into his coat and withdrew Augusta's letter. Clarissa's pulse raced. "This," he continued, "is a letter penned by Lady Augusta Windermere to my wife. In it, she offers money and safety in exchange for silence. Silence about what happened to my first wife, and silence about the suffering inflicted upon the woman I now call Duchess of Ravensmere." Gasps filled the room. Augusta paled, her fan trembling in her hand. Alaric held the room in his silence for a breath longer. "She is no longer welcome in my home," he declared, "nor in my name. Let this be the last lie she ever whispers in Bath." The room erupted in scandalized murmurs. Augusta rose, chin trembling, but no one offered her escort. She turned stiff-backed and walked out alone. Her heels clicked against marble like a woman exiled. Clarissa did not smile. She simply sat, heart pounding, watching her husband as if seeing him for the first time. That night the manor stood quiet again, but this time it was not oppressive. It was waiting. Clarissa stood before the tall doors of the West Wing, doors that had remained locked since Honoria's death. She had passed them many times, always with averted eyes. Now they stood open. Alaric waited for her inside. The suite was warm, lit only by candlelight. Shadows danced on velvet drapes and oak panels, softened by the flickering gold of dozens of flames. No portrait adorned the walls. No flowers from a former life remained. Clarissa stepped in slowly. Alaric turned to her. His jacket had been removed, his cravat loosened, but his voice was steady. "This wing has been dead for too long," he said. "I let the past decide who I was, what I would give, what I would fear." He approached her, each step measured. "But grief is not a tomb unless we choose to lie down in it." Clarissa met his gaze. "You're not the only one who mourned. I mourned a life I never had, a wedding without a marriage, a husband who touched every part of my world except my heart." Alaric reached out, his fingers brushing her hand. "May I begin again?" Tears rose to her eyes. "You may," she whispered. He took her hand, guiding her to the window where the moonlight softened everything it touched. They stood in silence, the candles burning low, the space between them finally bridged by honesty, not duty. Their lips met, slowly, reverently, not in desperation, but in restoration. It was not only a consummation of a marriage, it was the healing of two lives interrupted by ghosts, expectations, and fear. Later, lying beside him with her hand resting over his chest, Clarissa whispered, "What shall we build now?" "A life without ghosts," he said. "A home without locks. A love not borrowed from memory, but born in every breath we take." They fell asleep as dawn began to rise. And for the first time, Blackthorn Manor knew peace. Spring arrived not with the fanfare of blooming parades or sudden heat, but with a hush that settled like lace over the hills of Bath. At Blackthorn Manor, the frost had finally surrendered to green, and with it, something deep within the stone walls seemed to sigh in relief. Clarissa stood by the tall arched window of the morning room, her fingers trailing along the newly polished sill. Outside, the orchard was stirring, the cherry trees brimming with tentative blossoms, white and blushing pink like shy maidens at their first ball. The air smelled of turned earth, lavender oil and beeswax. Life had returned. The halls of the manor no longer echoed with the cold footsteps of a grieving duke, or the wary glances of servants unsure whom they served. Now there was music in the air, soft melodies from the pianoforte, laughter from the maids, and sunlight pouring through windows, long kept draped in mourning. Clarissa walked those corridors daily, not as a shadow, nor as a tolerated guest, but as the mistress of the house. She no longer counted her steps or second-guessed her welcome. Her shoulders were no longer drawn in defense, her gaze no longer braced for disdain. There was grace in her stride, and warmth in every greeting returned to her. Mrs. Stratton had begun leaving fresh posies in her sitting room again. It was on one such morning, as the birds argued merrily in the hedges beyond the glass, that Mrs. Stratton entered the room with a tremble in her hand and a sparkle in her eye. "My lady," she said, offering a folded note, the edges still creased from a physician's desk. "I believe you will want to read this in private." Clarissa's heart skipped. She opened it slowly, the words blurring for a moment before falling into meaning. She read it once, then again. Her breath hitched. Two fingers came instinctively to her abdomen where no change could yet be seen, and yet something already stirred. A knowledge, a truth, a miracle of blood and soul. She rose without a word. Crossing the garden paths that led behind the manor, she spotted him immediately. Alaric stood beneath a pergola half covered in ivy, pruning a stubborn rosebush with sleeves rolled and gloves removed. The image made her pause. There had been a time when she only knew him in shadow and silhouette, a man behind closed doors. Now, he stood in open air, sunlight playing at his temples. He looked up and smiled, not the small, polite curve of a host, but the slow, genuine warmth of a man at peace. Clarissa walked to him. She took his hand, rough from garden work, and without a word, placed it gently over her heart. Alaric froze, and then he understood. "Truly," he whispered. Clarissa nodded, tears misting her lashes. "A new chapter," she murmured. "A new life." He did not speak, but simply folded her into his arms, resting his cheek against her hair, the silence between them full of wonder. That afternoon, while retrieving an old book of botanical illustrations from the library, Clarissa stumbled upon something curious, wedged behind a loose stack on the highest shelf. A diary, leather-bound, delicately stitched. The initials HG carved faintly into the corner. Her breath caught. She sat in the window alcove, cradling it in her lap, and turned the brittle pages with reverence. Honoria's handwriting danced across the paper in looping script. Memories, thoughts, fears, and then near the end, a passage dated barely a week before her death. "If he ever loves again, let her be bold, brave, and unafraid to stand where I fell. Let her see him clearly. Let her stay." Clarissa closed the book, her hands trembling. That evening, as the last light of day painted the western sky in rose and amber, she handed the diary to Alaric in the drawing room. They sat side by side on the old chaise, the one that had once felt too formal for conversation, too stiff for comfort. He read the page twice, fingers brushing the words as though they held more than ink. "She knew," he said quietly. Clarissa tilted her head. "Knew what? That I would fall again. That grief wasn't the end of my story." He turned to her, his expression soft but solemn. "She let go before I could, and you never stopped standing." Clarissa smiled, the kind of smile that reached deep into the soul and warmed the places winter had lingered. Alaric took her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "She is," he whispered. They said nothing else. The days that followed bloomed gently. The manor was filled with small sounds, the tinkling of teacups in the sunroom, Edwin's footsteps returning from London with steady purpose, and the scurry of gardeners preparing beds for summer roses. Even the portrait of Honoria, once so dominating, now seemed to watch with quiet approval. Clarissa began planning for the nursery in the morning room, the brightest place in the house. She requested cream drapery, shelves for books, and a rocker near the fire. She placed a small carved angel from her childhood home on the mantel, its wings chipped, but its face serene. The servants no longer glanced nervously when she entered. They offered her their smiles without fear, their loyalty without condition. One afternoon, as Clarissa sat beneath the cherry trees, embroidery forgotten in her lap, Alaric joined her. He didn't speak. He simply took her hand. Around them, petals fell like snow, covering the grass in blush and white. Clarissa leaned her head against his shoulder. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "No," he answered. "Not anymore." The wind stirred the branches overhead. Somewhere in the manor, a clock chimed the hour, but neither of them moved. "I've been thinking of names," Clarissa whispered. "If it's a girl, perhaps Honoria. Not for memory, but for strength." Alaric nodded. "And if it's a boy?" She smiled. "We'll argue then." They sat in silence again, hearts light, souls whole. For the first time in many years, Blackthorn Manor did not feel like a place haunted by loss or bound by duty. It felt like home. And as the cherry blossoms swirled around them, Clarissa and Alaric walked hand in hand toward the future, not defined by sorrow, but illuminated by love. They were not the same people who had stood before the altar months ago, divided by grief, by silence, by ghosts. They were reborn, together. The blossoms had returned to Blackthorn Manor, as faithful as time and as fleeting as breath. The orchard, now in full bloom, sang with bees and the laughter of children darting between the trees. A kite soared above the western slope, its tail fluttering like a banner of joy, and somewhere beyond the hedgerows, a shepherd's flute echoed faintly across the fields. Clarissa stood at the top of the garden steps, watching the scene below with a heart so full it almost ached. 4 years had passed since the night Alaric had asked her to begin again, and they had. Their home, once a place of mourning and unspoken things, now thrived with life and music and voices. No longer did the halls carry only the weight of memory. They danced with the pitter-patter of small feet, the hum of lullabies, and the creak of wooden toys dragged across ancient floors. At her side, little Honoria, now 3, clutched the hem of Clarissa's gown with one chubby hand, her golden curls crowned with a ring of daisies woven clumsily by the kitchen maid. Her brother Edward, 2 years old and all determination, was chasing a butterfly with a twig sword and the solemnity of a knight in training. Their names had been chosen carefully. Honoria, not in mourning, but in honor. Edward, for the brother who had finally made peace with his debts and carved out a modest life as a merchant in Edinburgh. Edwin had paid for his mistakes, not in gold, but in resolve. He no longer drank. He no longer gambled. He wrote often and visited in spring, never leaving without a carved trinket for each of the children. Clarissa knelt beside her daughter and fixed a loose daisy. "Tell your brother not to chase the butterflies with sticks," she whispered with a smile. Honoria nodded seriously and skipped off to deliver the order. Behind her, she felt him approach. Alaric's hands settled on her shoulders with the gentle familiarity of long love. He kissed her temple, his lips warm with sunlight. "Do you remember," he murmured, "when this garden felt like a grave?" Clarissa tilted her head, resting it briefly against his chest. "Now it's our beginning." They stood in silence, watching their children beneath the trees. The world beyond Blackthorn had changed too. Lady Augusta Wintermere had never returned to Bath. Rumours had followed her to the continent, where she lived quietly in Vienna under a false name. Her reputation had dissolved like sugar in rain, sweet for a moment, then gone. Mr. Dandridge's death had left behind no legacy but caution, and among the staff at Blackthorn, the tale of the steward who served 2 masters became a whispered lesson in loyalty. Mrs. Stratton remained, of course. She had refused a generous pension and insisted on staying. "What else would I do?" she often said. In a house without secrets, the household thrived. Clarissa's charitable work expanded beyond the parish. She hosted lectures for young women, taught orphaned girls to read and stitch, and published pamphlets under a pen name, quietly shaping a future in which daughters might choose their own husbands. Alaric, once a man hollowed by loss, now read fairy tales by candlelight and kissed scraped knees with a sincerity that startled even himself. Their marriage was no longer new. It was something better, worn in, understood, and deeply tended. They had learned to disagree with grace, to apologize with humility, and to love without fear. The ghosts that once ruled their lives had faded, not forgotten, but laid to rest. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the children were tucked into bed, Clarissa opened the drawer of her writing desk and retrieved the final page of Honoria's diary. She had kept it, though she had never quite known why. She read the words again by lamplight. "If he ever loves again, let her be bold, brave, and unafraid to stand where I fell." Clarissa folded the page and placed it beside a ribbon from her wedding gown. Then she picked up her pen and began to write her own journal. The first line came easily. "He did, and I was." Outside, the cherry trees swayed in the wind, their petals drifting like confetti across the lawn. Blackthorn Manor had once been a house of silence. Now it was a home of voices. And in its heart lived a woman who had dared to love, not in spite of sorrow, but through it, until that love became not a second chance, but the only one that had ever truly mattered. And so ends the story of Clarissa and Alaric. But perhaps, in a way, it's only just beginning, because this is more than a tale of sorrow and second chances. It is a story about what it means to truly love, to stand in the ruins of someone else's heartbreak and choose to stay, to wait with patience, to fight with dignity, to heal with courage. Clarissa Elwood arrived at Blackthorn Manor as a stranger to its walls and to its ghosts. She was not chosen with affection, nor welcomed with tenderness, and yet she did not retreat. She dared to see beyond the pain. She dared to love a man still haunted by another woman's memory. And in doing so, she reminded us of one of life's most beautiful truths. Love does not always begin with fire. Sometimes it begins in silence and grows in the spaces where we choose kindness over pride. If you felt moved by this story, tell us what moment touched you most. Or simply write the word "reborn" in the comments to let us know you stayed with us until the very last page. You'll help this story find more hearts, just like yours. If you believe in the power of stories to heal and inspire, consider supporting the team that brings these romances to life. You can send us a super thanks here on YouTube in any amount that feels right to you. It's a gift from the heart, and it means the world to us. And if a financial gift isn't possible right now, your presence here is already a treasure. Just sharing this story with someone who loves historical romance is another beautiful way to help. We invite you to continue the journey. There are other passionate, emotional stories waiting for you. You'll find them in the cards at the end of this video. From all of us, thank you for believing in love after sorrow, light after shadow, and beginnings after endings. We'll see you in the next story.